Oh, the excitement of seeing that.
I do like it. It's a lot of fun.
Every time I wonder whether I've hit the right button. Every time. So, today we're talking what?
Puppets and voodoo dolls.
Faustiest witch of them all. You must, being a Fausty witch, you must use a lot of puppets and dolls and such. How many people have you got shoved in a doll?
Hey, I don't have a collection like you do.
I don't have a collection. They all go in jars. They all go in tiny little jars, you know. And depending on how much I like you,
okay,
you'll go in a bigger jar if I like you. You go in a small jar if I think you're a word I cannot say. Because I'm told off for a swear.
I think you mentioned something on, I don't know if it was Witchcraft Live, and Lauren was on about how she wanted to have a vault like Liam.
Oh, that's so the book. That's the prison book. Have you not seen the prison book? Yeah, that's the
prison book. I know the prison book.
There's a spirit in there. There's a spirit in there.
She imagined you've got a room full of voodoo dolls that obviously, and puppets that are just lined up with just people's names written across their chest in biro.
No, I don't really have that many enemies. And you know, if I do a doll, it's always for a client and it ends up getting sent to the client. Although every now and then they do send it back because they're worried, particularly the healing ones, because that's the thing.
Yeah.
The healing ones, they're always worried about taking those apart. Funnily enough, when it's some person's ex-husband, they don't really care about ripping it apart.
No, they're more than happy to put him on the compost heap, aren't they? Or burn him in the car park.
After they've driven over him a couple of times in their car, they don't mind ripping it apart, burning him. But the healing puppets, people get a little worried, and you can kind of see why that is.
You can kind of see why.
So, in terms of the dolls, instead of starting at the beginning, why don't we start at the end? So, if you finished with a doll, then how do you normally dispose of it and get rid of it? And will that vary depending on the work?
Yeah, for me, it depends. I find the easiest way, because you know me, I like everything to be natural where possible. So if I've got made sure all the bits of it for the client are biodegradable, and then it's a case of kind of disconnecting them. So, you know, releasing that bit of soul back to them, that essence that you've let you tied to it. And then just, a compost heap, bury it across. Well, I don't do the crossroads thing. That's more of a cunning man thing with you guys and traditional hedge witches. I don't really do that. I buried them in forests before. If you really wanted to make sure it's, you know, there's some bad juju in there, and you need to make sure.
Or just the puppet?
Just the puppet.
Right. Okay. Because the real people go under your patios, don't you?
Patio.
That's why you always have so many patios. Because you move.
That's why I move so often.
He always completes a patio and then he moves, or a shed, and then he moves very quickly after. It's very suspicious.
No. Well, I don't think it's all that suspicious. I think you just have low opinions of me. That's what it is.
No,
or high. I'm not sure what that refers to.
I think you're a troublemaker.
I don't think that's the case. I think I'm the sweet and innocent one, remember?
Okay, so in general, especially this week, I suppose.
Yeah, you're on the naughty. You're on the naughty steps this week.
I've been told off twice this week for 2 different infractions.
Yes, actually, technically.
Bringing the company into disrepute.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we won't go into that. Let's talk about
disposal. So yeah, I would normally let it rot away, with the exception of obviously our Foxy, who's a sacrificial puppet.
There he is. Foxy.
Who's designed to be burnt, ideally.
Well, that's what you originally designed him for when it first Samhain ritual. Wasn't it? But they just cottoned on so fast with these. I like using these because they're so versatile. I mean, they are cool.
So those traditionally would, I originally designed those as a sacrificial puppet. So one that's designed to be burnt, or you know, buried anyway as part of the process while still attached to whatever you were putting it in. So I probably should explain what I mean by a sacrificial one. So a sacrificial puppet would be if you are using it for, say, getting rid of worries, not necessarily attaching it to a person. So what you do is you'd either put your wishes in or put all your bad luck comments from the year, that sort of thing, stuff them inside the puppet and then ritually burn them in order to release them. So you can do it by one of two ways, which is one, it's either to burn and destroy bad juju, or it's for releasing I hate that word, but you know, new intentions for the year.
How very new agey.
It sticks in my throat every time I went to say it, but you know what I mean.
One of them crystal witches.
So that's what it is meant. What I mean by a sacrificial puppet. So not necessarily connected to a person, but is stuffed with, you know, you know, at the end of the year, like, because obviously for us Samhain is kind of New Year's Eve, is that idea of burning every, you know, getting rid of, you know, kind of the end of year spring clean. So at that, you might be stuffing in the puppet or your leftover incense at the bottom of your cauldron and your censer and all that kind of stuff. Little bits of this and that you've been holding on to because you know it's got magical charge in them and you kind of want to make sure they're disposed of properly. Well, that's what Fawkesy was originally designed for. But obviously he's cottoned on a little bit, hasn't he? And he's
named after
used
Guy
for all
Fawkes.
sorts now. Yeah.
Yeah, I like this because it is versatile. Because I normally use the wax puppets because I know good at sewing. So I'd normally use a wax puppet or something like that, but they stay obviously intact more. I do like the fact you melt them. So traditionally, like normally before I met you and you started making these for the Thoth Witchcraft Shop, which you should go and buy some from the Thoth Witchcraft Shop. I will leave a comment in that. You know,
and they's well cheap.
Yeah, go and buy some. These are really good. I even started putting them in a tin. Look, tiny little tin, and you can open it up, and it's got a little Fawkesy inside. You just got to stuff him. Brilliant. These are so cool. You don't get that from other witchcraft shops. You just get random trash from a little cellophane bag. But anyway, going back to my personal uses for puppets and stuff, I tended
you were supposed to talk about
use
destruction.
We'll get there. But I used to like doing the walnut-headed one. Have you got a walnut-headed one?
Yeah, I've got a walnut head here.
I love the little walnut head ones with an actual real walnut in where the brain's supposed to be.
Yeah, he's in there.
I like, because those ones, they make a lovely snapping sound when you break their arms and legs.
They do when you break their arms and legs.
Yeah, and they burn really nice. They give off a nice smell when you burn them. But also the beeswax poppets I used to make, those ones melt nice, but they also stay intact. So normally I tend to use the beeswax ones, or I always used to use the beeswax ones for healings. And then I'd use the walnut-headed ones normally for hexings and stuff like that. But since you started coming up with these, and since the consultation room is practically littered with them, because we got so many of them now, I thought I'm going to start moving on to these because, again, you can stuff the arms and you can stuff the legs. This one's got the head and the arms and legs stuffed, but normally, like you see when you get them in the tin, they're not. But, I mean, you generally select the type of puppet that you want to make based on the stuff that you've got to do. So if you're collecting a biologicals, you can pretty much stick any biologicals in that. The puppets with the clay or the beeswax and that, they're a little bit more difficult. So if someone, like, frequently they do send me a pants or socks and that, then instead of fashioning a puppet out of the pants and socks, normally I just stick it in one of these. Obviously, put your latex gloves on.
Stuff the arms and legs with it.
Yeah, I got a brand new big box of latex gloves because I got a lot of biologicals to work on that people will be sending me through the post now. Yeah. So to prepare their puppets and that. Oh, have we got a question?
We have already.
Okay, let me see if I can push the button. Right. In my opinion, as a real witch or wizard, the best kind of doll is one made by yourself. You know what it's being made of and who made it. Many people eBay, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so ultimately, that's a really, really good point. I think that any form of magic, certainly when we teach, then we try and get people to use all of the stuff that they make themselves and not to buy in. Don't buy in all of these oils and stuff. Don't buy in all of your poppets and that. Just make it yourself. And if you can't make the oil yourself, then don't use it. There's no need to use it. A lot of the time when people tend to think generally it's mundanes, and it's people that haven't really got a huge amount of experience, so they expect to buy a spell kit. I mean, the amount of times where we've done consultations and stuff, and we've got some examples of spells and stuff out, old ones and that, and they said, well, I just want to buy that one. I just want to buy that one because I know that one works because you've made it. And I'm like, well, no, the point of this is for you to learn how to not only cast the spell yourself, but how it works and that. And if we just sell you a pre-made spell, you're not really learning anything, are you? And some people get really, really funny with you, don't they?
Ours aren't complete, are they? They are just a framework for you to then work on.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of Fawksy, is that it's just the framework.
Yeah.
And we don't add any intent or energy to them. They are just made by me. Yeah. And you know, if you followed us in any way, shape or form, that I go to great lengths to make sure my energy is not included in things, because I don't feel that that's an appropriate thing to sell on to people.
Yeah.
So, you know, our processes where we're formulating any of the products that we make are about actually removing ourselves from the process wherever possible. The interesting part is what you're saying there about you've actually never burnt dolls before. That's interesting, because obviously the whole point, the whole story behind the burning of the Guy Fawkes is about that. It's not just about, you know, the Great Fire of London. It is a case of, it is a traditional method of disposing of, you know, you just have to look at stories like the Wicker Man. They work on exactly the same process of, you stuff them with the hopes and dreams or with the ill of the year or the leftovers that you want to get rid of in a safe cleansing, in a purge, is exactly why you would use fire to cleanse or purge something like that.
Yeah.
So the Fawksy, like I say, was originally designed to do exactly that.
That was the sacrificial puppet for Samhain, and when you come up with these things to set the people to do, go off and do this. What shall I do for Samhain? Why don't you do this? It'll be a benefit to you. Go and make your little doll, put all the things you want to get rid of, kill it. The problem I think with puppets particularly is that because they're used for so many different things, people get confused a lot. So I still meet people that say, well, a voodoo doll, that's just used for evil things and you stick pins in it and that. When actually, not only can you use acupuncture on a doll for healing, which would look like you're sticking a pins in it, which might not look good, but actually often used for healing. But also, more often than not, I tend to find healing magic and puppets go hand in hand. I find that the clients that I meet tend to respond a lot better to puppets rather than all these single-use spells and that kind of thing, because I'm not one for single-use spells. I don't like them, particularly when it comes to beginners, because you're hoping that you've done it all right first time, and that when you've done that thing and let go of it, it's all going to work out.
Yeah.
Whereas an open link is one of those things that I prefer. I mean, at the end of the day, if you've got a puppet, not only are there lots of different types of puppets that you can make, but there's also lots of different ways of working with them. So a couple of the common ones would be, like Chris said, the Sacrificial Puppet, which isn't attached to anyone. You've also got egregore type puppets. So you've got protection puppets and things that you might make. I'm doing a little video at the moment where there's going to be, you know, you get a vacuum cleaner and a couple of screwdrivers, and you go throughout your house and you scrape up all of the little bits of dirt and random bits and pieces from in the fan, in the bathroom, extractor fan from underneath the rug, from all of the stuff from every room, and then you put it on the table and you fashion a puppet out of it, and then you breathe the life into it to protect your home, because it's made from stuff within the home. In terms of how you would make that puppet, of course, course, will depend on what you've got. So what falls out that vacuum cleaner afterwards? If it's all just a load of dust, then it might be good to stuff it in something like this. But it's something that you can tie together and use cords and knots and things to knot a poppet, then that's one thing. So you've got your kind of protection poppet, almost like an egregore. But then you've also got obviously just the sympathetic magic in the focusing part, because some people don't actually create a link. They don't take that fragment of the lower regions of someone's soul and stick it in. They just look at it and it's not really connected. So if you took that poppet and ran over it in a car, it wouldn't really do anything, because they're not really interacting with it.
I think we need some definitions here.
Okay.
Because I think we might be going over people's heads at this point.
Okay.
So I think we start with probably the difference between a voodoo doll and a poppet, for example, and what we are talking about when we're talking about those. So obviously voodoo dolls are specifically of that tradition, voodoo dolls, and they're actually more often than not actually used for healing traditionally. The pins are actually for directing energy to those particular points, like Liam said, in a kind of acupuncture kind of way of working with a healing poppet. So there are different types of, whether or not you would use biologicals, etc., in kind of voodoo and hoodoo methods. Biologicals are obviously normally the popular way of doing it, but that's because they kind of fall in those kind of methods like gree where, animal, mineral, herbal combined in order to make a foundation of a lot of their work. So there is part of that animal part is the biologicals that you would put in to represent the person that you're working with in order to make that work. The difference between that and a European doll, which would be what we would call a poppet. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, bear with me. No, I'll finish my point and we'll get back to it.
Comments.
So with the difference being kind of, poppets, yes, is what we would use for in traditional European witchcraft or folk magic, which is where the original story or line for a rag doll comes from, which is where at the birth of a new child, you would create a protective doll that would sit with the child in the baby's crib. Obviously, the baby, in those days, it's a chance that there's a high mortality rate of whether or not that child will survive. So they would make protective poppets. So what these would be made of, where normally the child's hair or as they got older, baby's teeth, etc., were added into the poppet to stay as their guard, to protect them while they slept, while they played, and then obviously that child will then play with that poppet as they got older, and that's obviously where rag dolls that were normally in the shape and visage of the child it belonged to. So that's kind of the kind of different. They're different in the sense that their traditions have come from. Obviously, as in Europe, because we're in the UK, obviously we would normally use the word poppet to describe a doll in those kind of voodoo doll exist. Okay. So yes, that's what I was trying to just kind of, because some people might not know the basic difference. They're not all the same. Haunted dolls are very different to voodoo dolls. And that is something we can talk about another time, but obviously that's not part of what we were trying to discuss today. Although if we've got time at the end, I guess we can.
Okay. So I think we got a question in regards to, is it sacrificial dolls? That's not correct. This is clearly done for commercial purposes. You can't connect that to witchcraft in a shape like that, clearly insulting the whole idea of paganism and all witches by saying that the Wicker Man is clearly symbolic and has nothing whatsoever to do with witchcraft.
Okay.
Right, okay. I think he's confused. I think this person's confused in that I think they think you meant that when you talk about a sacrificial puppet, because you compared to burning it like a Wicker Man,
yeah,
that you thought that this person obviously might think the sacrificial puppet is a Wicker Man, but obviously you're using that as an example.
An example to kind of explain what I mean.
Sum up what you mean by a sacrificial puppet again. So what the idea of doing that, why you would make one.
Yeah. So the as part of a kind of ritual cleanse, so is the idea of using the, you know, a puppet in order to do that, in which case you would leftover bits from spells throughout the year, kind of left offcuts and things like that from anything you may have crafted. Some witches don't like to just throw that on the compost heap, depending on, particularly if it's for client work. Obviously both of us are professional witches, so it's a case of we work with clients a lot of the time that aren't family or friends, and you don't want to kind of, you have to approach each one of those in their kind of clinical box of making sure everything that's related to that is made sure that that is used or given back to the client, etc. What Liam was trying to say earlier was that obviously some people don't like the disposal part of puppets, and therefore sometimes will send them back. With this is not a traditional, it's not a method, a traditional method of doing it. This is my version of it, which is that it is a sacrificial puppet. So some people would, you know, have ritual bonfires in order to get rid of leftover parts. A tidy way of doing that was this sacrificial puppet. So I'm not saying that the Wicker Man is a sacrificial puppet. I'm saying that was an example of what I meant by ritual burning. Most people are familiar with the Wicker Man from television, even if they've never studied witchcraft.
Yeah. Okay.
So not in any way connected.
So we've got this idea of a sacrificial puppet, which is something that you normally recommend as a nice way of doing sort of spring cleaning almost, and a cleansing.
Yeah, tying everything together before the start of a new year.
Okay. So then the idea of creating a protection doll, obviously you talked a little bit about a little bit of history there of creating them to protect a child and having it close to the child and that. Obviously there's the idea that people will create fetches and protection kind of spirits and stuff. Popular method for doing that is to create them in the form of a doll and then hide that on the premises. I've done quite a lot of those before. They used to often, I know people in older houses tend to put them up the chimney or somewhere like that in the cavity wall. Nowadays, what I tend to do is I tend to get people to find the sort of central part of the house, because nowadays in a lot of these new builds, you can't open the floorboards up because it's chipboard or it's concrete, and you can't get in the loft if you're in an apartment. So what else is there? You know, what are you doing? Keeping it in a box behind the sofa? Well, one of the most popular ones that I like to do to explain to people is to take sort of one of the internal walls, and of course a lot of them are all hollow nowadays. They might have a little bit of insulation in, but a lot of them in the UK don't even have that. So it's just the cavity. So if you remove the little fast fix boxes for your sockets and various other little bits and pieces that are in the wall out, you can actually just take them out and pop things behind. And I've done quite a lot of those. Obviously used to be an electrician, so a little bit of extra. I'll fix your socket, change your sockets, make them all nice and chromy and that. And then I'll make a little jar and stick it behind your wall if you pay a little extra type thing. Yeah. It's a fun little thing, but yeah, things have to kind of adapt. People have to adapt, because you hear a lot within traditional witchcraft and that about the hearth and all that sort of thing. But actually, these modern houses, a lot of them don't have. They don't have hearths. They don't have gardens. No
they
gardens.
Barely have floors.
Yeah, so where you're putting witch bottle sort of thing. So but yeah, a case of really, when it comes to modern craft, you've got to be as creative as possible. And don't do something because the book told you to do. Really understand
why you're doing it.
Why you're doing it, and interact with the ingredients and the method, and be 100% on board with the method, or don't do it or adapt it. So the next thing really probably the most popular thing, which is what everyone really wants to know about, is the working on a person through a puppet. So you've got the stereotypical just using it as an image to focus on. And you're not really tying it. It's not really a doorway, is it? But then going a little bit more advanced from that, you're actually ripping open a doorway and pulling a thread through the puppet. So that's an open doorway. So whatever happens to the puppet will have an effect on that person, regardless of whether the witches are holding it or what have you. I've done both. I tend to find that for beginners, not having that open doorway is probably a safer bet, because they're just using the sympathetic magic and the focusing on it. They're not actually able necessarily to pull that strand through that connects directly to their astral body, the astral body of the person. So for when you get a little bit more comfortable and you are able to do that, you can have some wonderful fun with it, because of course you don't really have to do don't have to put a lot of effort in. I had one client where I made a puppet for her because she was struggling to make that connection. So I just made the connection and then just gave her back the puppet. And obviously whatever she does with the puppet is going to manifest in the person's life. So I gave her a puppet in a little box. And what did she do? She put it in the chest freezer, which is a very cold environment. And then the person ended up getting pneumonia. Which was quite funny. She put it in the chest freezer, not because she wanted to give him pneumonia. She put him in the chest freezer because she didn't want the puppet in the house, because it was a freaking her out that every time she did something, she was putting the cigarettes. She was a chain smoker. She was keeping it under a smoking chair in the conservatory and putting her cigarettes out on it. And then that started to manifest, not particularly nicely in the man's health conditions and such. And then she thought, I don't like this about, because she was able to start feeling the energy from it. Obviously that connection there, she was able to feel that, which freaked her out a little bit, because she was a beginner and she wasn't really, didn't have a huge amount of interest necessarily in witchcraft and magic and that. She just wanted a job done. So that freaked her out. She put it in the chest freezer, which was in a little outhouse out in the garden, far away from her, but still close enough for her to grab it. And that was an interesting manifestation there. But that's I think the one that people are often scared of. It's the idea that you're actually making this some sort of gateway or doorway into the person that it represents. So
I suppose we probably need to cover that a little bit deeper too, which is the idea of traditional puppets and voodoo dolls work on the same principle, which is that they are supposed to have the visage of the person you're working with. So regardless of whether or not it's made of clay, or if it's made of wax, or if it's made of cloth, the idea is, some people feel that it needs to look as much like them as possible. So some will get very bogged down with the idea of making sure it looks as much like the person it's supposed to connect to as possible. What they forget often is that is only designed to make you connect to it. So it's something, it's a repetitive notion. So the whole point of, why some people will stick a photograph face of directly on, so that the second they see it, they instantly connect. So obviously that's the one way of working with them, which is the sympathetic magic way of working with them, is that kind of using their visage in order to remind you of them, so you don't have to spend that time connecting by trying to remember every detail of that person's face. So, particularly if you're a witch that doesn't have photographic memory and is not very good at visualizing, having that image there, even if it's just the shape of an eye or the nose, even if you get just one part of that right, that makes you go instantly, that's it, I know exactly who that is the important part of that. It doesn't need to be that way. What you could do, again with the Foxy that we do, because it's a plain canvas, you could just repeatedly write that person's name all over it, You know, it's whatever forces that connection for the witch to access that person. So that's a sympathetic way of working, which is the whole idea is that it looks and and to a certain extent behaves like the person. And by that I mean, does this wink that he always does, or has a slight mole in a particular place of this lady. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is that part of it that is supposed to kind of go, how do you make that instantly recognizable as the person you are trying to attach it to? And that's what that's about. Obviously, as you get better at it and you've worked with more dolls, you get to the point where you're kind of like, actually, I don't necessarily need that. What I need is to feel the energy of the person. Now, that is when it's done with biologicals. So biologicals at that point is about you reaching to it and kind of going, okay, I can feel their presence there. It has the energy, the smell, or I went to say taste then, but you know what I mean. I often use taste to describe what I mean by energy.
Where
Palette.
you think
Yeah.
of the palette of energy and the different energies that are there, you think of taste buds, don't you? That's where your mind automatically goes. Yes, so creating an open doorway through the puppet to get to the person so that you can work the puppet and thereby affect the person. I think that's quite a secretive thing because you don't see people discussing it, and it can be difficult, but that's only because I think people make it more difficult, and because too much of magic or practice nowadays is all about this. You need to develop your psychic ability to the point where, you can just bang and do it. Whereas I find that with the sheer amount of people that we've met that have got no interest in magic or witchcraft, other than that they want to heal someone, a specific person, or they want to curse or cause trouble for someone, and they'll learn enough about how to work a puppet and that to be able to open that link to the person and start to create effects. So in terms of the easiest ways of doing that, what I tend to find is that the more, because you're basically building up the signature of that person, the essence of that person, that kind of a feeling that you get from that person. So the more of the person that's in the puppet and the more the puppet looks like the person, the easier it's probably going to be. So ultimately it's going to vary because it's going to depend on what you have access to. If you say it was your ex-lover and you've still got some of their socks and pants lying around the house in the drawer or something like that, or one of their old wristwatches, or I don't know, maybe they cut their nails and you went in the bin and got some of that out, then you've got all of these biologicals. You've got some pants, you've got some socks, you've got some nails, you've got a couple of hairs and stuff, you've got all of these bits and pieces that are all biologically connected to them. And of course the physical body houses the consciousness. Your physical body is designed in such a way to be the perfect house for you to interact with this physical world. So taking a part of that is an actual link to you. So if you have that, that's brilliant, because that can help you build that connection just by adding those things, and the dolls start to take on. Even not particularly psychically sensitive people can kind of feel like, oh yeah, this is like him, or this is like her, or this is like them. Whereas when you fashion the doll as well to physically look like them, is it someone with a big nose? You might not draw the entire face on, but you might draw a picture of a big pointy nose, because when you think about them, it's the man or the woman with the big pointy nose that you don't like, or you do like. It depends. So the more you've got to put in there that is symbolic of that connection, but also is actually already has a connection, I think is the trick. The difficulty,
and then obviously the more you've got, the less work that's required to make that instant connection.
The easier it is.
Even if it's just the aftershave that they normally wear, it doesn't need to be their bottle of aftershave, but if you can spritz it a couple of times with the brand that they know they normally wear, if that triggers your thought process of jumping straight, that's John, like, you know what I mean, like, that's instant. That particularly works with ex-lovers, etc. I know we keep going back to that one, but that's a common place where they want to have access.
Yeah.
So, but I kind of, okay, so I kind of think in next part, I don't think to a certain extent we need to explain the process of reaching through and, you know, pulling through their essence through the astral. I don't think that that will be something that they will particularly either one understand, but obviously, but you can go to our videos on Witchcraft Live and find more videos on
the
particular types of
I think
puppets.
in the Witchcraft Live Facebook group we did a couple of videos on
Yeah.
puppets. The important one is if you don't have access to those things, say it's someone that you don't have access to. Well, there's two things you can do there. Well, there's lots of things you can do, but the two popular things that I suggest is, obviously you're talking about to a certain extent entanglement between two things. So if you've got some of their hair, that's already a part of them and already linked to them. What you're talking about is you're talking about getting something and making it attached to them. So it might be a bit weird if you take the puppet and tuck it in their back pocket and make it them hang around with it for any length of time so that the energy kind of rubs off on it. But if you take just a crystal, or if you take a little bit of dirt or something like that and you stick it on their shoes or in their shoes and then come in a week later take it off, that thing has been hanging around with them for a certain amount of time. So you're either putting something in their environment to kind of pick up on a little bit of energy and then taking it back afterwards, or if they're over the other side of the world and you don't know who they are necessarily, you could still do that kind of work. But you're not going to have anything that's been in their physical, you know, surroundings. So physical imagery of pictures and stuff, Facebook profiles, assuming that the profile picture that they use is their real one. That can help, you know. So it depends on what you have access to and how competent you are at working with the energy and stuff. And the more competent you are, the less you need. You might not need a puppet at all. Of course, you don't necessarily need a puppet at all.
No.
You know, when you get to that ability and start working up. But from a very, very beginner who's never done anything and isn't particularly sensitive, psychically speaking, they can't pick up the energy. Having all these biologicals and stuff and putting in it, they even start to sense that energy. But is there anything to add?
Well, I was just wondering whether or not it was a good idea to give that example I always give of a very talented arty friend of mine who accidentally made a puppet. You know, essentially what she was doing was exactly what you would do when you work with a puppet. It's my favorite one to kind of refer to it because it demonstrates one, a benevolent way of working with puppets, but also a non-traditional way of working with puppets, which is you know, a particular arty friend of mine did a caricature of her son when he was going through a really complex set of interviews for a job he really wanted, or an internship or something like that, where there was multiple stages. It's not relevant, but you know, so she'd drawn this caricature of him and started writing notes and drawing doodles all the way around him of all his best attributes and what she wanted them to notice about him. And then essentially what she did is she stuck it up in her studio on the wall, and every day she would look up at it and throw kind of thoughts and energy at it, you know, focusing on some of those words that she had written on that kind of was transmuting that kind of motherly energy and transmuting it into a support part. And then obviously every stage that he was successful at, she would add new drawings or new attributes, you know, extra you know, hearts or kisses, whatever it was she was doing. But as it was growing and growing, she was adding to it. But the important part was that interaction. Every day that she was working in that studio, she was working on it, you know, not just the days that he was actually getting the actual interviews. They were on every day, so that she was in that studio. So he was getting that constant energy, that constant reinforcement that would be giving him the confidence and whatever to do it. Obviously, he was none the aware of what was going on. To be fair, neither was she. it wasn't until she came to a session with me on dolls, and then she kind of like, well, from what you've just said, kind of like this situation sounds like I may have done one. Am I right? And I was like, yeah, that's exactly the process of working with a doll in that sympathetic magic kind of way. Obviously, it wouldn't be a great story if he didn't get the job. Obviously, he got the job. But and however many hundreds of candidates he beat to get it, obviously he was very good and the perfect candidate. But sometimes that's not what's required in order to get you that job. Sometimes it's a case of actually, being there at the right time, certain things that you remember to say, confidence, that kind of energy there. So, she was pushing and pushing and pushing like any mother would. But what's different about that is there was no doll there. It was paper and ink.
Well, it's a two-dimensional doll. It was just a picture.
It was a two-dimensional doll.
Two-dimensional doll. If you wanted to do that in 3 dimensions, you'd get it. And those things that you write down, you just open the head up and pop them in. And that sort of magic can be very, very potent, because it can be good things and good thoughts that you put in, or it can be bad thoughts. Are you going to give someone confidence? Or are you going to manipulate someone into hating themselves and wanting to commit suicide? It depends on what sort of a work you're doing. But the power of thought and putting thoughts in someone's head, if you're using a puppet for that, you're going to be getting little post-it notes and adding one in the head every day whilst that connection's there. And if you're adding them, particularly when you're putting it from that person's perspective, so I hate myself, I'm an idiot, blah, 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 and obviously put that in, so the thought manifests as if it's coming from them, not you're an idiot or such and such. Generally, that's how I say anyway. It's better to write your note as if it's coming from the person who you're targeting, so that it tends to, I find, be clearer in the person who's writing its head, so the witch's head, but also you're also thinking about it constantly from the perspective of the target as well. So, but yeah, so where are we going next then? So with the puppets, you've got the starting the connection and that. What about the differences between hexing, nastiness, and healing and stuff? Because we breezed over a little bit about single-use spells and that, the sort where you just anoint this candle, burn it, and then let go of the balloon and it will go in and manifest. Versus the sort of puppet work where you're constantly doing stuff and
working on a connection.
Working through the connection and on the connection and expanding the connection and that. Because with healing, of course, things can take a sour turn, can't they? Even with medicine nowadays, the doctor can prescribe the wrong thing, or they can prescribe the right thing and it has a negative impact on the body. Hashtag methotrexate. That sort of thing. You working through the puppet, you're able to modify your spell in action. So as it's continuing on, you're modifying it. So,
which is the bit most people forget about when they think of spells. They don't think of time. They think of, well, I need to throw this energy at a situation. Those single-use spells, even when targeted, are exactly that. But once you've let go, that balloon is gone. Then there is no, there is no holding on to it after that. And at that point, it's gone. So releasing that out. Whereas when you've got something like this, which is a maintained connection, you have the option to go back in and out. The only thing I probably feel like we should definitely say there is the fact that there is the danger of a open connection like that. People forget.
Don't scare them, Chris.
No, but people forget that
going and they're hexing all of their people they don't like, and now you're going to scare them into thinking, oh no, maybe I won't do that after all.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is people forget, particularly in the kind of voodoo hoodoo traditions, in the way in which the connection is established, it is an open link and therefore goes both ways. And what people often forget is when you work for a puppet for too long without actually considering, which for most people isn't a problem, because normally when they're using a puppet on somebody else, that is a witch using a puppet on a mundane. If it just so happens that that person isn't as mundane as you thought, and therefore has any kind of protections or whatever working back up that, it means that that is an established two-way connection, and therefore can throw negative energy back in your direction and positive energy. But I'm just saying the ones that you're going to care about are the ones that are negative. So, you know, remembering that that is an open, if you're using the open connection method, is that is about establishing a link to the intended target. And obviously, a lot of people forget when they watch what's out there online, they don't explain that to them. And I think it's one part that needs to mention.
I think from the healing perspective, of course, when you're using a puppet, or from a hexing perspective, that puppet is the person. That puppet is an extra limb / extra fragment of that person. It's like an embassy. It's a part of them. So if they're aware of that part of them, they're able to reach through it back. And all of a sudden, that little puppet that you're working on, that's on your little altar or something like that, that person's in your altar space. That person's there. That person's doing it. You know, they're able to reach through and they get you. Also, from the, not going too far into the sort of black magic and the baneful kind of magic, but even from healing perspectives, if you're working through someone that's very ill, then that energy can sometimes come back through as well. And it might not necessarily make you ill, but if you're very sensitive to that kind of thing, you'll be picking up as if that person is in the room with you. So if you go into a hospital, like I had to go into a hospital today to take someone into hospital, the energy of the hospital is full of sick people, particularly in the radiology department, which is where I was in. So with that, it's like, oh, this is, there's quite a lot going on in here. Not nice. Well, that's going to start radiating through, almost like radiation, emanating through the puppet, because that connection, that doorway is open. Which is one of the reasons why we always tell people to not only put it in the box to protect the puppet, because you don't want your dog chewing it if it's a healing doll, but also because it can contain that energy as well. I think we've got some questions. Did you have anything else to add, or shall I'll read the questions?
No, we'll come back to it. That's fine.
So Lauren says, I recently watched a video from Hoodoo Delish, #Hoodoo Delish, the YouTuber.
She's very good.
Recommended by you, Chris, and watched because I was following along Liam's Hoodoo spell video. From the spellcasting course, And she talked about how magic can work differently with narcissists because of the way their ego is sort of manifesting differently. Can you two say what you think about that, and if there are any extra considerations when doing puppet magic with narcissists?
Sounds like Lauren's got somebody in mind.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Lauren's clearly got someone in mind, doesn't she?
Yeah.
I don't think it's just narcissists. I think that what you need to remember, again, because that is an open connection, we tend to worry a little bit more about people trying to make an open connection with a witch, because that witch is going to be able to, if they're more advanced than you, they'll kick your ass. If they're at your sort of level, then they're still going to be able to kind of reach through, you know? When it comes to dealing with the psychology of the person, then ultimately that should be factored into the approach that you're going to make, which is going to be entirely dependent on what you're trying to do, you know?
Yeah. So the only part that would be tricky is when you're trying to frame those phrases. So if you're going through a method of putting some phrases into somebody's head, you need to be approaching that from not just what you want, but what would be the most normal for them to hear.
Yeah.
So you've got to approach that from their, in that sense, their ego sense of going, well, actually, this person's a narcissist. So in which case, am I going with words? Are you actually focusing on, because all narcissists, even the ones that completely love themselves, have weaknesses. They'll have something that triggers them in order to feed this feedback loop with their narcissism. So, you know, you've either got to be really selective and find that Achilles heel, which, you know, if you know the person particularly well, I'm sure there'll be a way to find that.
Yeah.
But a part of that has always got to be part of it. So if you are putting thoughts in a person's head, they've got to fit. If they don't, somebody is going to be going, well, this, you know, if they're particularly switched on, they're going to go, well, actually, that doesn't sound like me, because they know what their inner monologue sounds like. So, and by that I mean the sort of words that they would use. So if you know, someone that uses fancy Latin, kind of, you know, really flamboyant words, you're not necessarily going to get that. You know, they're not going to think in that process. So if you're focusing on, you know, because I will often say, go with no more than 3 phrases. If you're going for more than 3 phrases, you're going to confuse yourself and the process, and it gets too complicated. You know, you as you know, work them on down, boil them down until you get what you think is the perfect couple of phrases, or if possible, a single phrase works the best. You know, keep it simple, stupid. You know, is very much what I think when it comes to magical workings. The more convoluted it is, the more room there is for something to go wrong. And that's when you're going to get yourself caught up with somebody that has a different psychological profile to yourself. What I would normally do in that situation, if you were dealing with a narcissist and your words aren't working, then you just change the approach. And that's the beauty of having a poppet, is you can change the approach. Okay, stuffing words in this guy's head is not working. So, you know, take the words out, go for something else. You know, it might.
If you're dealing with a sociopath and you're a love and light sort of a person, you won't be thinking, you won't be writing things like, I feel guilty, I feel empathy, how could I do that to the person? Because it's not really going to register all that much in the head of a sociopath. What you're going to be thinking, if you want the sociopath to leave you alone, you're going to be making them think, I respect that person, that person's interesting, I want to befriend that person. You're not going to be thinking, I love that person, because that's not going to work well with a sociopath. Much like trying to send a computer virus that's designed to run on Windows to a Mac. Probably not going to work, you know?
Probably going to cause some interference, but not the interference you wanted it to cause.
You might open up a text file and a load of gobbledygook sprays out, but you're not really going to do much. But the more you know about the person, the more you can tailor the assault or the healing. It's when you don't know the person, that's the difficult bit, because that's when the astral spine and such comes in, which we'll be doing a lot of that in the next Witchcraft Live, Witch Wars, sorry, won't we?
Yes, yes. But they've got another month to wait for that.
Yeah, they got another month to make. Okay, so what's next on the list then? So we got our poppets, healing, hexing. In terms of what could go wrong, of course, you can either mess it up, or probably the worst thing that would tend to happen would be if you were doing something nasty, and then that two-way, that connection you think is a one-way connection becomes a two-way connection.
And you start to get the repeal.
Yeah. So that's one of those things that it doesn't really happen very often, does it? That's the thing. But if you was to do your work on a witch, you would find that probably will happen.
You'd find that out. But then part of that is that part you were saying before, which is remember it's an environment. So when you're working with this as an access point, it's an environment that you've got to then consider. If you're working on a sick person, you're not going to want them to have free access to all the energies going on in your space, particularly if you're the sort of witch that's going to work. It has, open altar spaces. There's going to be other energies going on in that space. You're going to want to make sure that they are shielded from that, unless that's part of the working. So, placing it in a box of some description gives you that option. Also, and particularly dealing with sick people, is that you're wanting to protect that space around them. So, you're not wanting things to influence them. Additional negatives.
so if we got our puppet, no matter what type of puppet it is, whether it's a cloth puppet, whether it's a, I don't know, whatever puppet,
coin dolly,
puppet, corn dolly, whatever it is, generally I'd say get a container to keep the puppet in. This one's a crappy little plastic container because that was on my desk. That's what my luncher came in. That's what I had my lunch in today when I was out and about. But the point of this is when you work in puppet magic, I think when we teach this as a dual thing, don't we? We teach that you're affecting the puppet, but you're also affecting the box the puppet is stored in. This is the person, this is the environment. So this is the house they live in, or the office in which they work in, or their general environment that follows them around like a rain cloud. This is the puppet. If you're wanting them to be in a safe environment, because this is a healing puppet, you want to keep it in a safe place. You want to take this puppet, you want to keep it in a safe box so the dog don't get to it, or it don't get accidentally thrown out by someone else that you live with because they think it's rubbish. And you want to put it away somewhere warm, because you wouldn't want to put it in somewhere cold because that might not necessarily have a good impact on someone that's ill. Okay, but as well as if you're talking about affecting the environment, now, if you're working on the puppet here, I had a client, right, who really took to this well. She was trying to get a man to fall in love with her, okay? And yeah, you could say that that's not such a good idea, but in the end of the day, that's what she wanted to do. It wasn't supposed to be a permanent love. She wanted him to fall in love with her so that she could steal all his money. So she worked on putting thoughts in his head, which made him think about her, which started to manifest. But then what we had was, whenever she would take the doll out of the box, she would treat it really nicely. She would always look at it, and she would feed it bits of, herbal stuff, dry ingredients from the kitchen when she's making a meal, little bits of that. She would feed the puppet. It would kind of fatten him up. It would be a nurturing kind of experience for that connection to the man. The box, however, was full of nasty crap. So it had the double kind of thing of, not only is he thinking about her, not only is the nurturing kind of cherishing thoughts of that lady,
connection
was there. Whenever he's away from her in the box, he's in a bad environment. So you've got two things going on there. You've got whenever she's not with him, not with the puppet, he's in a bad place. But whenever he is with her, not only is she programming his thoughts and his intentions and getting him to act and do things, then that's also a dual kind of thing. So always remember about that, because I think with puppet work, people just get too bogged down in the actual, the puppet itself, but you can make a whole doll's house thing. Like I've had workers where you're trying to affect a whole group of people, say the entire management team of a business, where you might make a little puppet of all of them, and you might put them all in a box, and then you might put very chaotic things in there and make them all banged together or face each other, or group them off and tie a couple of them together. So this group of managers hates this group of managers, and they all fall out, and it's all chaotic. Just think about the symbology, really, and mess about with it.
What I will add, to just further to the Lauren comment, particularly with narcissists, and not just, but those sorts of psychological profiles, I find, which is one for her to think about, mirror boxes work particularly well with those that don't fall into the normal behaviors of, people that care about other people. So sometimes what works best with those is a mirror box where either they're being isolated, because groups like sociopaths, narcissists, they are feeders. They feed off that energy of others. So it's a case of whether or not you isolate them using a mirror box, or, you could use a void box, but I like the mirror box because when you start to magnify, particularly if you get these kind of parts of old mirrors from cosmetics where they've got extra magnification, is where you start to force on where you get them to look deeper at themselves, because they won't pay attention to somebody else, but if they find an imperfection in themselves, they will obsess on that. So those sorts of kind of negative character traits can be magnified using things like mirror boxes or shadow boxes. So if you're particularly trying to figure out the best way to deal with those sorts of character types, there is that opportunity there for you to think about those. So I suppose we're already at the hour, believe it or not. Have we got anything that we need to say, or
well, the only thing
questions?
I would pick up on from what you've basically just said, so everyone write your questions if you want to get some last minute questions in. But I'd say in regards to what you've said about dealing with narcissists, if it was a predator or a sociopath, you would probably use a transparent box. So whether it's one of those wood boxes from the works with a little glass window in the top, I've done it whereby you can use Tupperware containers. People don't really like to use Tupperware containers, but what you can get from the works is those little wooden boxes with the glass. And I like to paint the inside white. And when you look through the glass, it really does highlight the doll and everything that's in it. Because, of course, sociopaths and fake people, they don't like the light, the cold, harsh light of transparency. So they lose their power when everyone can see them for what they are. So if you're working on a doll and you're working inside the doll and putting things in the doll, and that person's one of those types of personalities, then actually having attention drawn to them and them being presented in a box as to exactly what they are. Those ones which I really like, the ones, I think they're supposed to be for jewelry boxes and that, but they're the ones that look like books. When you take the lid off and it's got the cover with the little, it's plastic, it's not really glass, but the plastic reveal on the top. Prop it up on the shelf so it's looking out. Or
I've often put them under kind of lamps on the side, where you've got a high intensity like reading lamp, and you just kind of shine it directly into the box for a few hours of the day. Where you're kind of like, giving that kind of spotlight effect of feeling on edge of everything is going on, and everybody can see what they're doing. But that kind of transparent boxes have a very different feel. The only one warning I would say from that is back to the two-way situation, where if you've got someone that is sensitive enough to reach back up that, you've then got them in a transparent box that they can see out of. You don't have that with the box that is.
But you can alter that as well, because what are you doing? Are you keeping that box out in the shed? Are you putting it in the window of the shed so it looks out and the light of day is always shining upon it? I mean, the main point here is to really think about the symbology, not looking up in the book or what someone else is telling you to do. Just really think about it. And then the one thing
what does it mean for you?
We haven't really covered is the ingredients that you're putting in the doll. So I think that it's really good to stay simple, but I know certainly a lot of the witches we work with have got idle thumbs and they like to continually prod and poke. So think about how you're prodding and poking, that if you're doing a hex or something, is it going to cause trouble that's not going to get in the way of what you want to do? So if you're wanting to cause pain and discomfort and you're doing poppet work that causes pain and discomfort and you don't really want to mess about with that, just adding some black tea or coffee into the poppet, some would say stimulating the other ingredients that are in there. I want them to stay awake at night and not to get a moment's sleep. I want them to be up all night, not being able to get a moment's rest. Now, I always use tea because I'm highly susceptible to caffeine in any form. So if I have a Coca-Cola at 3 o'clock, I won't sleep till 12 o'clock in the morning. I'm really bad with that sort of thing. But obviously it depends on the ingredients. Allow the ingredients to talk to you. When you think of that, don't go running out and using black tea for that very same thing because Liam uses it. Think yourself about what
are the connotations for you?
Me, what are the connotations to me, and do I know of any connotations to the person? Have they got any allergies, for example? That sort of thing. So there we go. Yeah, so if there isn't anything else, I think
well, there's a couple more.
Oh, is there a couple more? Sorry.
Lauren's asked a couple more. So
talking about the boxes. So yeah, she's happy with the boxes. Filled wax skull with black honey to create a mental echo chamber. Yeah, that's great. Again, you can think about the skull as the head of the puppet. So you don't necessarily have to use a puppet. A lot of people don't necessarily just use a puppet. They'll use an aspect of a puppet. And that sort of thing is quite good. Again, it really depends. The only thing I think we haven't really covered is probably...
Well, you haven't finished the question.
Well, the only thing... Well, that was it, wasn't it?
No, my question is, can you elaborate a little bit on programming the box?
Oh, we did that. She said thank you.
No, the thank you was for the transparency bit that you were talking about.
Right, okay. So 2 other things. We'll carry on into extra time. 2 other things. 1, program in the box, and 2, permanent puppets that you don't want to destroy. That we didn't really cover that much. So in terms of
so the materials used for actually making the puppet. Yeah,
in terms of programming the box, the one thing that I will always do generically when I give a box to a client is I will use a special secret formula to make that box a bound box, a secure, a Saturnine binding, or Saturnian binding, so the energy cannot seep out of the box. Now that's kind of health and safety, and it goes without kind of saying, when you've got beginners, you want them to be able to shut the thing away and not be affected by it. But it does mean that if they take that box, because we just normally give out little boxes made of wood, that kind of thing, it's easy for them to get a Stanley knife and carve a little window out if they need access to put a little window in or something like that. So if I don't quite know what they're going to do with it, then I'd rather keep the box secure itself, so that anything that I put in it, so if I put some really nasty stuff in it for a hexing, I'm going to be making sure that that doesn't affect the environment I'm keeping the box in. Also, if I've got 10 of these on the go, not that I have, and they're all stacked on top of each other on the bookcase, then I don't want them affecting each other either. So, you know, so
clinical
putting
boxes.
in the box a couple of ideas of what to put in the person's environment then, Chris. Temptation. What would symbolize temptation? Well, if they're an alcoholic, then you could literally fill the box up with booze, or you know, that kind of thing. It's the symbology.
Well, you know,
there.
Or the idea, depending on what you're trying to do, is put an empty bottle, those empty miniatures, because nothing drives a drunk more than an empty bottle.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, it really depends on what you're attempting to do, but you treat the box the same way you would with the puppet, which is use the symbolism that makes sense to you. It doesn't need to be full of stuff. If you need it to be, it can be empty. Yeah. Just be aware of that. If you're creating an environment, that environment is appropriate for what it is. So, you know, for example, you don't want to get dirt in someone you're treating while they're currently going for chemotherapy. You don't want the inside of that box to get dirty. So I would go to the point where I might even a couple of times a week clean out the box, if that's what I'm doing, to make sure that stays the habitat that is required. So, you know, it's that part that you've got to experience. Like Liam said, always consider it ideally needs to be a sealed space, because you don't want that interacting. You don't want things getting in, and you don't want things getting out. But because obviously the second you take the doll out to work with it, you're working with it in that environment. You then want to shut that off from that environment, so it's not impacting other workings or yourself. But yeah, what goes in there, you know, can be given as much detail as you like. Like I said, I've known people go to the extent of creating entire doll houses for them, where they actually look like the place that they actually want it to be in. You don't have to go to that level. The whole idea is, what do you need to trigger the thought process for the spell crafting that you are doing? Do you need to remind yourself of their address? Like, you know what I mean? It might just be a case of writing that on the inside of the box. Just needs, it's a, you connect to that every time you see it.
Or
It's what's needed for you.
16 Backside Avenue, 69 Backside Avenue, where she lives. And then that box is the house, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, simply putting it, the more effort that you put into it, you don't necessarily just have to put the effort in because you need all of that symbology, but also things like this, workings like this, can be a little bit addictive and super fun to do, particularly ones where you're fucking with someone. And it might mean that some people are a little bit more elaborate than others. Maybe you are going to paint the box inside white. Maybe you're going to strap the poppet to a piece of metal and stick it in the bottom, and it'll be like one of these weird clean rooms you get from these sci-fi films where they're in a white room and the aliens that come on and dissect bits of them, and then they get the probe out and stuff. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But just remember, 2 spells in 1. That's the good thing. And it comes with a lot of protection. If people are working, if you get that binding right, if you're good at binding that box, and I do highly recommend that everyone should be working to be competent on that, when that witch moves through, they're going to be able to get so far, they won't be able to necessarily get out of that box. Now, will you get a nice surprise or a nasty surprise when you open that box? Maybe. But if you do that sort of binding properly, then that's not necessarily going to be able to affect your environment without you noticing. So you can get into the habit of, okay, I'm going to be opening the box now. I'm going to be going in and seeing what's going on. Also, I do like the idea of putting creepy crawlies and such in the box as well sometimes. Much like I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Pour a load of maggots on it and make sure that whatever is inside the poppet, the maggots that eat. I did have one lady that felt that used to put again, it was another ex-husband one. She used to fill the box with the cat shit from the garden because she had a neighbours with cats and they'd always shit in her garden, and rather than flinging them back over the head, she'd just put them in the box. The bad thing was that she said, okay, I want rid of this box now. Can you go and do whatever it is you do to destroy it? And I was like, you've given me a box full of cat shit. I don't really want to do it. I don't really want to touch that, thanks.
No.
But no, she put it in the dog poop bin because that's another favourite of mine, putting it in the dog poop bin. But there we go. So yeah, any other questions?
Oh, no, but I think very quickly need to just say about what we're making them of. So obviously we've talked mostly about dolls today, cloth ones. Obviously we've mentioned kind of wax, etc. There is a kind of tradition of, you know, what you choose based on what you're trying to achieve. So normally, if it is something, if it's negative work, you normally would build it of something that is going to decompose, that you can destroy quite easily. When you're doing healing work is when they tend to do things that will last. So for example, making something out of wax or metal, as the Greeks once did, bits of lead, etc. Or like I say, clay, something that will set hard and is less likely to degrade, because you're trying to preserve something. That is the whole point. So whereas, you know, if you're wanting something that you're trying to do baneful work, you know, we talked about disposing of, maybe with that particular person that you want to do baneful things to, you want to leave that connection while you let it rot in the compost bin. But it's a case of, you know, thinking of understanding what the connotations of that are and what that means while that happens. But at the same time, you know, depending on how you want to use it will change what material you choose to make it from. The whole process from start to finish should have your thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's what's different. Like I said, we've given examples throughout this, and why we would do it in that particular way. Those are just the ways that we would do it, or people that we have worked with have done it. You could do it completely differently. You know, I've seen poppets made literally with a little bit of string, a little loop for the head, a knot for the body, with arms and legs on it. That's it. I've seen people that have gone to the effort of painting their nails to be perfect in order to make every aspect of what makes that person there visually.
I've seen a little puppets be attached to the exhaust of a van, so there will be fumes to go on the puppet and dirty it up. So going full circle then, my personal approach to getting rid of puppets, because I have a super simple method for it, and that is, if it's a healing puppet, I will always dismantle the puppet myself. So if it was something like this, I'd take the bits apart, put them into little piles, and then dispose of them wherever I think is relevant. Crossroads, graveyard, somewhere nice, don't really matter. With nasty puppets, I tend to do it either letting it rot away itself, or if I'm going to get rid of it, I'll do it quickly and destructively. So I don't really tend to do that with healing puppets. If I dismantle it slowly, I dismantle it myself. I won't just go and leave the puppet somewhere. Hexing puppets, I will go and leave it somewhere to rot away, or if I dismantle it myself, I do it in a quick destructive manner, so burning or something like that. Okay, now the difference there that people get confused is that I don't mind burning a healing puppet, but I will burn it after I've taken it apart. So I'll burn the remains of it. So I'll take it all apart, put it into little piles, light up the cauldron or the fire or whatever, and put little bits on it at a time, because I'm undoing it before I destroy it. Whereas with a hexing, I'm basically leaving it to slowly destroy itself. And most of the time, that's what I do. I tend to leave it to rot somewhere, put it in the dump, put it somewhere nasty.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there we go. So anything else? I don't know. I think that's it.
No, I think we did. I think we covered everything quite thoroughly there.
Okay. Yeah.
Obviously, there were umpteen ways you could possibly go down to specifics.
Yeah.
But as a subject, I think that's pretty well covered.
Well, we've covered the basics, and we're only 17 minutes over, so there we go. So, thanks everyone for watching the Faustiest Witch of them all, Chris, and me, of course, as well, on the Fausty Witches Show for Keep on Chatting Paranormal Television
Network.
That's all, folks.
If you're tired of all the neo-pagan claptrap that's on the internet and want to see some real witchcraft, please subscribe to the Thoth TV YouTube channel. If you really want to kick things up a notch, try clicking the No Holds Barred podcast link.